The end of Xbox. This is something I've seen mentioned over and over again on social media, all over Twitter, YouTube. It's certainly been a rough week, the last 7 or 8 days or so at least, for Xbox, really ever since some reports started to break and information got out there through data mining for an update that people were really down on the future of Xbox and Microsoft and their plans going forward. And now we have this week coming up where we're expecting, according to Phil Spencer, a business event, and it has people on edge all over the place. But I wanted to talk a bit about what's going on here, what we can expect, and maybe even balance out this entire discourse online with some more, I guess, objective takes on this. So if you guys enjoy the video, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe if you're new. Now, again, this started with reports around exclusives from Microsoft going to other platforms. I don't think it was really a big deal to people when we heard Hi-Fi Rush and Sea of Thieves. Hi-Fi Rush, I did notice, got at least some pushback, at least on certain areas, we'll say social media and YouTube. But it was like, well, you know what, Hi-Fi Rush, okay, smaller game for Microsoft. It would probably do pretty well, I feel like, on the Switch, on PlayStation. It would just be more money for Tango, who I really think at this point Microsoft needs to make some pretty big investments because they obviously have a lot of creativity in that studio going on. But outside of that, Sea of Thieves, live service, sure. But then we hear Starfield, and that really got people's attention. They're like, oh, whoa, hold on. That's a pretty big title to move over to PS5 already even. I mean, the game came out really just months ago, right? And then we hear about Indiana Jones. It's like, that game's not even out yet. And then Gears of War pops up, and then people were just thinking, could be anything. Halo could make the move, which I will say, I think some of these rumors have spiraled out of control completely because I don't really think anyone legitimately knows what is about to be said by Microsoft and Phil Spencer at this business event. And I feel like we don't really know which games are even going to make the jump outside of Hi-Fi Rush. There's at least some tangible evidence from that data mining that appeared to show certain images that would be platform exclusive and were heavily hinting towards Switch and PlayStation 5. But at this point, it's kind of like people throwing darts at a dartboard as to what could be going multi-platform for Microsoft. In fact, the one that really started it all, right, was Starfield, might not actually be happening. And that sounds weird to people now because of everything that's been said over the last week. But Nate was actually kind of apprehensive about it at first. And I think Xbox Era pushed it out there and broke the news on it, the report. And even then he had mentioned to me, he's like, this has been floated around and I heard about it, but I don't know if it got to that point where it was, okay, it's scheduled, they figured it out. And he's since said this in public now. And in fact, he actually kind of came out and sort of backtrack on it a bit. It's like, I sort of feel like this is fiction, actually, the Starfield report. So Starfield might not be happening, at least at this time, as something that could maybe be announced at this business event, which then calls into question things like Indiana Jones, Gears of War. And I think the big thing here is that there are discussions going on within Microsoft. And I think there are some people at Microsoft who think this is a good idea and some who think this is a bad idea, because other parts of the reports are that the reason we know about this is because some are just putting the info out there. They're like, hey, you know what? I don't like this, but if I get it out into the public and Microsoft maybe sees the reaction, which clearly they have because the business event wasn't supposed to be happening until the end of this month, but now it's happening next week. So they've moved it up 1 or 2 weeks, we'll say, for that. But now there is uncertainty for Microsoft's future in gaming, just in general, when it comes to like a first party, a platform publisher, right? A company that puts out a system and then publishes games for it to bring you to that ecosystem. And then it's also people are wondering, is the Game Pass vision dead, right? The idea of getting these games day one, if you're subscribed to Game Pass Ultimate going forward, even with Activision Blizzard, which I will say it feels like that is something that's completely changed all of this, right? Ever since they closed the deal for it, and then the new year started, seemed like things were changing a bit behind the scenes. And I kind of wonder if Microsoft looked at Activision Blizzard's books. They're like, oh, wow, this is going to take a long time to get the $70 billion back. when it comes to the profit that they're bringing in, which means we have to now come up with ways to basically exploit a lot of these intellectual properties beyond just Game Pass and Xbox as it stands now, which of course brings in the idea of going multi-platform. More than people would expect, sure, but really just exploring a world of customers outside of what they've been able to do with Xbox, which, if you've kept up on the sales, while they have been kind of vague, we at least get a trend, an idea as to how it's selling year over year, and it's not exactly growing at the rate I feel like they would like it to, and in fact, most times they talk about hardware, it's almost flat or declining. So I kind of feel like the Xbox Series may not even outsell the Xbox One at this point, which means, okay, we've now spent like $90 billion or something on studios, with obviously the big one being Activision Blizzard at $70 billion. We got to start making money off this, like legit money, not just like, okay, yeah, we'll make $15 billion a year or something on that. They're thinking like double that, I'm sure. Like they really want to try to start chipping away at this $70 billion price tag that they just paid, right, to get that money back, to show to investors that this gaming sector is the direction they should be going in with a primary focus, because now technically Xbox, the division, is making, or at least bringing in more gross revenue than Windows. And that's just where they are now. If you consider the idea of them expanding outwards, okay, well, we can make even more money over Windows. And that's why I think there is a tug of war within Microsoft. On one side, you have Tim Stewart, the CFO, and Satya Nadella, who don't seem to like exclusives. They've mentioned putting these games anywhere there's a screen. On the other side, you have Phil Spencer, Matt Booty, Sarah Bond, who seem more in line with the idea of playing within the console sandbox, as in, okay, Sony does exclusives, Nintendo does exclusives, we're going to adopt that strategy and attempt to bring people into the ecosystem that way. All right, as in, you want to buy this game, you either need to have Windows or Game Pass that way, or you have an Xbox, right? You sell the system to then sell software, but you need the software to sell the system. So that's sort of where we are, and that's one of the reasons I feel like we're getting mixed signals right now, but also why I think there will be a business event, because Satya Nadella is the CEO, then Tim Stewart's the CFO, so the chief financial officer shows up, and then you have the big boss and Satya Nadella showing up, and I feel like they're kind of winning out with this stuff behind the scenes, and that's one of the reasons we probably will be hearing about several games, I'll say, over the next year or two that will be multi-platform. And I will say the reaction online has been over the top and dramatic at times, but I feel like the images of people smashing Xboxes or trading them in, and just obviously saying, I'm done with Xbox forever, I feel like that takes center stage right now for, I mean, we've seen articles even written up about this, collecting all these. I feel like that kind of drowns out or overtakes the conversation from legitimate concerns, because there are legit concerns around this, right? It's not just, oh, people realize that Microsoft is a business and not just a friend who is like working alongside of you. The legitimate concerns clearly would be what happens to the Xbox hardware, because if these games are indeed available on the PlayStation 5 and the Switch, and then eventually the PlayStation 6 and Nintendo's next system and so on, why would you buy an Xbox? Because those other platforms do have exclusives, some from third party, some from first party, but Microsoft wouldn't necessarily be playing in that console sandbox anymore. And really the only reason then to own an Xbox is your digital library, which is already kind of in question now, because if Microsoft, say, leaves the hardware game, what happens to your digital library that you may have invested thousands of dollars in over the past several generations now? And then what happens to the space when it comes to competition with PlayStation? You can say that there hasn't really been competition necessarily, because at least with the Xbox One, Sony just kind of ran them over right out of the gate. And so far with the PS5 and the Xbox Series, kind of been the same way when it comes to just raw console numbers and sales. But still, just the looming presence, I feel like, of a company as large as Microsoft, just within proximity to Sony, should be enough to at least push them along. But based on what Sony's been doing, whether it's raising their subscription fees to where it's $80 a year to play online, or at times going, I mean, multiple years even, it seems like now, with like one or maybe two big first-party exclusive setup does kind of feel like they're getting comfortable, right? Even with Microsoft around. So then you kind of envision it without an Xbox and it's just PlayStation. When it comes to the high-end console market, I know Nintendo's there, but even Nintendo themselves kind of adopted the blue ocean strategy, and they're working more towards the idea of them doing their own thing, leaving PlayStation all by themselves. So what is Microsoft going to say this week? Well, I will tell you up front, I don't think it's going to be this massive shift that people are expecting now, and in some ways, it might be kind of boring. I'm trying to figure out if it's going to be a video, like they just put something out on YouTube, or maybe they live stream it as like an actual event, or if it's just a press release. That's kind of where it's like, which one would they do? Because the way they've sort of discussed it now with Phil Spencer on Twitter saying it's a business event, it kind of feels like they're going to do something with video. But who knows? Maybe they just throw out something on Xbox Wire or their news Xbox site, and it just details their strategies going forward between Satya Nadella, Tim Stewart, Phil Spencer, all writing up different parts of it maybe. And that, to me, is the biggest thing right now. As I'm mentioning these different people, they all seem to be communicating a different message at times. And really, they need to come together and solve Microsoft and Xbox's biggest issue currently. That's communication. They're all over the place with what they're trying to do here, and I feel like that's one of the reasons that there's so much chaos online, because people can't really decipher or read through the lines when you're basically obscuring all the pages constantly. So in this case, they need to be very, very clear with their messaging. They have to explain what's going on with Game Pass, because we've seen some stuff being brought up, although it appears to be older stuff, but still, it has kicked off the conversation of rebranding. The idea that Activision Blizzard with Call of Duty might not be going into Game Pass day one, at least at its current tier and pricing. Maybe there's an additional tier for Activision Blizzard that includes Call of Duty. Is that the case? Is it too cheap right now for how much it costs to make Call of Duty every year, and they can't take that hit? Well, you can't kind of muddy that up and hide. You have to just put it out there and say that is the case, and here's how we're going to solve it. And I think you have to absolutely show up and say, yes, we're still doing hardware. That is not going away. Or explain that you're winding it down, because I don't think they will. I think hardware is still a focus for Microsoft because it is a way for them to connect to the consumer in a way that Windows just doesn't do. This is something that is entertainment based, and if they do indeed achieve their vision that I think they're going to put out in place, which is we're going to be as many places as possible, whether it's on your phone, whether it's on PlayStation, whether it's on Switch or Xbox or Windows, we will be there and we will have games available. And in their mind, that's a way for them to become, I think, the biggest publisher in the video game space based on the amount of intellectual properties they control and the amount of studios that they have. Which leads us, of course, to the big elephant in the room, and that is exclusives. What's exclusive to Xbox and we'll say Windows and Game Pass, and what isn't? And that's a branding thing that they have to figure out. Do they have something that's like only on Xbox? Like, remember back in the day, you'd have the Xbox box art, and at the top, it was like the yellow stamp that would say only on Xbox. Is that something they have to do here? Is there a way that they can communicate that just through like a tagline? It's tough because clearly they don't want to keep everything to Xbox, but then they also want to have certain things stay and certain things go, and it's tough. It is a tough thing to communicate, because to me it's either you're all in on exclusivity or you're not, especially when it comes to some of these bigger titles, because even if you say it's just on Xbox, if people look at, let's say you do move Starfield over, well, then people are going to look at Indiana Jones or look at Perfect Dark, and they'll say, well, I mean, obviously that'll eventually show up on PlayStation 5 because Starfield did. So I feel like it's going to be harder to communicate which game is where if you don't have a clear-cut strategy in mind, and that's the biggest problem. I don't think they do. I think it is really a case-by-case basis, and they're basically arguing it out back and forth in the boardroom as to what goes where. So this is tough. It is. And that's one of the reasons I am very, very curious what they have to say for us this week. But I don't think it's going to be as sensationalized as people are making it out to be. I think Microsoft will double down on the idea of creating hardware going forward. At the very least, they have another generation in mind. And who knows, maybe the idea of this hybrid handheld is also a thing. I feel like that would be an interesting avenue for them to go down, but they have to explain what's going on with exclusives for their games and what's going on with Game Pass, because a lot of questions around that, and then confidence behind the brand going forward, if indeed they have it. And I think they do. So we'll see what happens this week, but let me know what you guys think about all of this down below, and let me know what you think Phil Spencer, Satya Nadella, Tim Stewart, whoever shows up this week coming up, hopefully on Monday, so we can get that out of the way, what they have to say for us about Xbox and Microsoft gaming going forward. Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.